The silence this Christmas was a particular kind of loud. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a winter morning, all frosted panes and sleepy anticipation. It was the echoing quiet of an empty stage, the actors having long since decided the play wasn't worth their performance. My performance, our shared history. They called it a surprise trip, a last-minute jaunt to somewhere sunny, somewhere with beaches instead of the snow I always loved, the snow that fell softly outside my window that Christmas morning, dusting the world in a purity they had long since abandoned, at least in my regard. A surprise. Yes, it was. A surprise to find myself so thoroughly forgotten. A relic gathering dust in the corner of their busy, vibrant lives. The scent of pine needles from the small tree I'd bothered to put up myself. For myself. Mingled with the aroma of the cinnamon rolls I'd baked out of habit. A habit formed over decades of Christmas mornings, filled with laughter, with little hands snatching at treats, with the warmth of bodies gathered close. Now, the only warmth came from the radiator hissing in the corner and the single cup of tea clutched in my own aging hands. It wasn't just the absence of their presence. It was the absence of their thought. No call, no hurried, guilty text message. Just silence. A vast, yawning chasm where love used to reside, or so I'd believed. I walked through the rooms of my house, each one a museum of memories they seemed eager to escape. Photographs smiled down from the walls, younger versions of them, of me, frozen in moments of apparent joy. Were they real, those moments? Or just pretty lies we told the camera? The grandfather clock in the hall, a wedding gift from my own parents, ticked with a solemn rhythm, marking time that felt suddenly, overwhelmingly finite. This wasn't just a missed Christmas. This was a culmination, a final, brutal punctuation mark at the end of a sentence I'd been trying not to read for years. A sentence that spoke of gradual erosion, of calls returned too late, of birthdays remembered with a belated card, if at all, of lives lived in parallel, their tracks diverging so sharply from mine that we could no longer even see each other across the divide. And in that profound, deafening silence of Christmas Day, a new sound began to emerge, a whisper from within myself, a whisper of resolution, a whisper of an ending, yes, but also a beginning. My beginning. The cold of the teacup seeped into my fingers, but a different kind of warmth was kindling in my chest. A fire, small at first, but resolute. They had made their choice, displayed it with such casual, thoughtless cruelty. And now, it was my turn to choose. The snow kept falling, blanketing the old, familiar world outside. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that when the thaw came, things would be different, utterly, irrevocably different. The gifts I had painstakingly wrapped, labeled with their names, sat beneath the small tree, a vibrant splash of color in the muted room. They looked like orphans, unclaimed. And, in a way, I suppose they were. Just like me. The roots of this Christmas abandonment went deep. Far deeper than a single holiday season. They twisted through years, through countless small neglects that, like tiny drops of water, had slowly eroded the bedrock of our connection. I remembered Sarah's wedding. I'd offered to help with the planning, to share my own experiences, my little book of carefully preserved lace samples. She'd smiled that tight, polite smile of hers, the one that meant thank you, but no thank you. "It's all very different now, Mum," she'd said. A gentle dismissal that stung more than any outright rejection. I'd sat at the wedding, a guest like any other, watching her new family, her new life, unfold without any real input from me. Then there was Mark, my brilliant, ambitious Mark. He'd moved overseas for work, promising regular calls, visits. The calls became sporadic, filled with the jargon of his corporate world, a language I didn't speak. Visits became fleeting, duty-bound affairs, his eyes always straying to his phone, his mind already on the next flight, the next deal. When I had that bad fall 2 years ago, the doctor said I shouldn't be alone. I'd called them, of course. Sarah had a work conference she absolutely couldn't miss. Mark was in the middle of a crucial project. Neighbors brought soup. A kind young woman from the church, bless her heart, checked in daily. My own children sent flowers, a week later, with a card signed by a secretary. Flowers. As if petals could mend a broken hip or a fractured heart. They were always busy. That was the refrain, the constant wearying excuse. Busy building their careers. Busy raising their own children. Children I rarely saw, who knew me more as a distant figure in photographs than as a living, breathing grandmother. I tried, you know. I really did. I learned to use the video calls, fumbling with the technology, just to see their faces, to hear my grandchildren's voices. But often, I'd be staring at a screen, listening to a distracted, "Sorry, Grandma, gotta go," before the connection abruptly ended. It was like tending a garden that refused to bloom, pouring water and love onto soil that had become barren. Or perhaps soil that simply preferred a different kind of nourishment, one I could no longer provide. They built walls, not maliciously, I used to tell myself, just thoughtlessly. The incidental cruelties of lives lived too fast, too focused on the next acquisition, the next upgrade, the next socially validated milestone. My milestones: a quiet birthday, a cherished anniversary of their father's passing, the simple desire for companionship. These were inconvenient interruptions to their relentless forward momentum. And I, in my quiet house, became an island, the waters between us growing wider and rougher with each passing year. The Christmas before this last, desolate one, Sarah had hosted. I'd arrived, laden with carefully chosen gifts, homemade cookies. The traditions I clung to, I found myself relegated to a corner, watching them interact, a closed circle I was no longer truly part of. My granddaughters, teenagers then, were absorbed in their phones, offering monosyllabic answers to my attempts at conversation. Mark and Sarah discussed their investments, their holiday plans for the next year, plans that clearly didn't include me. It wasn't a single act of malice, you see. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Each one, small, almost insignificant on its own. But, together they bled me dry. And that final Christmas, that echoing silence, wasn't a surprise attack. It was the inevitable surrender of a fortress long besieged, its foundations rotted from within by neglect. The decision didn't arrive in a thunderclap. No dramatic moment of tearful revelation under the stark Christmas lights. It bloomed slowly, in the fertile ground of that profound Christmas Day silence. It was a quiet unfolding, like a clenched fist finally relaxing, finger by weary finger. For years, I'd made excuses for them, for myself. I told myself this was just how modern families were, fragmented, busy. I told myself my expectations were too high, relics of a bygone era. But sitting there, the untouched cinnamon rolls growing cold on the counter, the silence pressing in, I realized the only person I was fooling was myself. The story I'd woven, of a loving, albeit distracted, family, was a fiction. A comforting lie I'd clung to because the truth was too painful to acknowledge. But pain, I was discovering, could also be a catalyst. A sharp, clarifying force. Why should my life savings, the careful stewardship of my late husband's hard work, and my own modest earnings, go to people who valued my presence so little? People who could so easily erase me from their most cherished celebrations? The question hung in the air, as tangible as the scent of pine. And the answer, when it came, was simple. It shouldn't. There was no anger in that moment, not the hot, flaring kind. Instead, a cool, clear resolve settled over me, a sense of justice, perhaps. Or maybe it was simply self-preservation, a reclaiming of my own narrative. I had spent a lifetime giving. My time, my love, my energy, my resources. And what had I received in return? An empty house on Christmas Day. An answering machine filled with my own hopeful, unreturned messages. The slow, dawning realization that I was, to them, an obligation. A faded photograph. No more. The thought of changing my will wasn't new. It had flickered at the edges of my mind during other lonely moments, other casual dismissals. But I'd always pushed it away, guilt-ridden. They were my family, after all. Blood. But what was blood? If it didn't carry warmth, if it didn't pulse with connection. That Christmas, the guilt was gone, washed away by the tide of their indifference. What remained was a profound sense of clarity. My legacy, the sum total of my life's material worth, could be something more than a final, unappreciated gift to those who had already taken so much. It could be a statement. It could be a source of good in a world that sorely needed it. It could be a reflection of my values, not theirs. I looked at the small, lonely Christmas tree. Its lights twinkled bravely in the dimming afternoon light, and I felt a sense of kinship with it, small, perhaps overlooked, but still capable of shining. The decision wasn't about revenge, not truly, not in the bitter, corrosive way. It was about rebalancing. It was about acknowledging the truth of my life, the truth of their choices, and making a choice of my own that was equally unequivocal. It was about taking back control of the final chapter. My final chapter. And as the day drew to a close, the snow still falling, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. The burden of expectation, of futile hope, had lifted. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was mine. Entirely mine. The Tuesday after that stark Christmas, I called Mr. Henderson. His voice, dry and precise as I remembered from when he'd handled my late husband Arthur's estate, was a comfort. "Mrs. Albright," he said, a hint of surprise in his tone. We hadn't spoken in years. I imagined him, spectacles perched on his nose, surrounded by a fortress of legal documents, a man who dealt in facts, not fleeting emotions. That was what I needed. Facts. Action. "I'd like to make some changes to my will," I said, my own voice calmer than I'd anticipated. There was no tremor, no hesitation. The decision had settled into my bones, solid and unshakable. He made an appointment for the following week. Walking into his quiet, book-lined office felt like stepping into a different world, a world where intentions were made concrete, where words had weight and legal force. He listened patiently as I outlined my wishes, his expression unreadable. I didn't offer lengthy explanations for my decision. I didn't feel the need to justify myself to him or to anyone. This wasn't about their failings anymore. It was about my purpose. "And the beneficiaries?" he asked, pen poised. That was the part I had given the most thought to in the intervening days. It couldn't be arbitrary. It had to mean something. I thought of Arthur, his love for animals. The way his face would light up when our old dog, Buster, would lay his head in his lap. So, a portion to the local animal shelter, the one struggling with donations, the one whose newsletter I always read with a pang of sympathy. They did such good work, tireless work, for creatures who couldn't speak for themselves. Then, I thought of my own mother, a teacher who believed fiercely in the power of education, especially for girls who might otherwise be denied it. A scholarship fund, perhaps, at the community college, for young women pursuing their dreams, a way to plant seeds of opportunity. And finally, a cause close to my own quiet passions. A small, dedicated hospice, the one where my dearest friend Eleanor had spent her last days, surrounded by such kindness, such dignity. They understood the value of a gentle ending, of comfort in the face of the inevitable. These choices felt right. They resonated with a deep, inner chord. They were a reflection of the love and values that had shaped my life, values my own children seemed to have either forgotten or discarded. Mr. Henderson simply nodded, making notes. "It's a significant change, Eleanor," he said, using my first name, a small sign of our long, if infrequent, acquaintance. "Are you quite sure?" I met his gaze directly. "Mr. Henderson," I replied, "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." There was a quiet dignity in that office, a sense of profound personal agency. I was no longer a passive recipient of neglect, a forgotten figure in the family portrait. I was the author of my own final testament. The process was straightforward, the legal language precise. Signing the new will felt like closing a door on one chapter and opening another. Not a grand, dramatic gesture, but a quiet, firm click. As I left his office, the winter air felt crisp and clean. The world looked sharper, somehow. I wasn't leaving my family out of my will to punish them, not entirely. I was leaving them out because they had already opted out of my life. My legacy would now nurture things that were alive, things that offered comfort, hope, and second chances. It felt good. It felt like breathing again, after holding my breath for a very, very long time. Life after that decision took on a different hue. A quiet sense of peace settled in, the kind that comes not from blissful ignorance, but from clear-eyed acceptance. The constant, low hum of anxiety about their calls, their visits, their fleeting attention, it simply faded. I had taken my power back. Not by confronting them. What would have been the point? More excuses, more justifications, perhaps even manufactured tears. No, I had taken it back by redirecting the flow of my life, my resources, my emotional energy. I found myself with more time. Or perhaps I simply allowed myself to use my time differently. I started volunteering at the animal shelter I'd named in my will. The work was simple: folding laundry, petting anxious cats, walking the older dogs who needed a gentler pace. But the unspoken gratitude in a dog's eyes, the purr of a contented cat in my lap, these were genuine connections, untainted by obligation or history. There was a young woman there, Chloe, a student who reminded me a little of myself at that age, full of ideals and a slightly bruised heart. We'd chat sometimes, over lukewarm coffee during our breaks. She never asked about my family, and I never offered. It was a friendship based on shared purpose, light and undemanding. I also reconnected with my love for gardening, something Arthur and I had shared. My small backyard became my sanctuary. I planted roses, their thorns a reminder that beauty often requires protection. I planted herbs, their fragrance a daily comfort. Tending to those living things, watching them respond to care, was a balm to my soul. It was what I had tried to do for my children. But here, in the soil, the effort yielded tangible results. Did my family notice a change in me? If they did, they never mentioned it. Our occasional phone calls, initiated by me out of lingering habit, remained brief, perfunctory. Sarah was busy with her daughter's university applications. Mark was busy with a new promotion. Their lives continued on their separate tracks, oblivious to the quiet revolution that had taken place within me. There was a strange sort of freedom in that. I was no longer waiting for them to see me, to value me. I was seeing and valuing myself. One afternoon, my granddaughter, Lily, Sarah's youngest, called me. It was unexpected. She was quieter than her older sister, more observant. "Grandma," she said, her voice hesitant. "I was just wondering, are you okay?" Her call was a small crack of light in the wall they had built. I didn't tell her about the will, of course. I simply said, "I'm very well, dear. Thank you for asking." We talked for a little while about her school, a book she was reading. It was a small connection, but it felt real. Perhaps, I thought, not all roots grow in the same direction. Some find their own way to the light. But it didn't change my resolve. The decision was made. My legacy was set. And I lived with that knowledge, a quiet, steady undercurrent beneath the surface of my days. It wasn't a secret I guarded jealously, but a private truth that gave me strength. I was no longer just a mother, a grandmother. I was Eleanor Albright, a woman with her own purpose, her own story to complete, on her own terms. And that, I discovered, was a surprisingly contented way to live. There comes a time when the body begins to echo the heart's weariness. It wasn't a dramatic collapse, no sudden illness that sent everyone rushing to a bedside. Though I often wondered, if it had been, would they have come? Or would their busy lives have found another, more pressing engagement? No. It was a slow fading, like an old photograph losing its color, the edges blurring. I felt it in the mornings, the stiffness in my joints taking longer to yield. I felt it in the afternoons, the need for rest coming sooner, more insistently. My garden, once a source of boundless energy, became a place for quiet contemplation, my hands less able to coax life from the soil with the same vigor. Yet, there was no fear. Odd, isn't it? You'd think facing one's own mortality would bring a measure of terror. But what I felt was a strange sense of completion, of a task well done, a circle nearing its close. The decision about my will had, in an unexpected way, prepared me for this. It had allowed me to define my ending, to imbue it with meaning beyond the biological fact of cessation. My legacy wasn't tied to their memories of me, which I suspected would be fleeting and self-serving. It was tied to the animals who would find shelter, the young women who would find opportunity, the dying who would find comfort. These were the roots I was now tending, roots that would flourish long after I was gone. I thought often of Arthur, of our life together, the good years, the hard years. He had been a practical man, but a kind one. I believe he would have understood my decision. He, too, had felt the sting of our children's growing distance in his later years, though he rarely spoke of it. His silence then had been one of hurt. My silence now was one of resolve. I made sure my affairs were in perfect order. Mr. Henderson had copies of everything. I wrote a few letters, not to my family, but to Chloe from the shelter, to the director of the hospice. Just simple notes of gratitude, of hope for the work they would continue. These felt like more important communications than any last words to those who had long stopped listening. One evening, sitting by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of apricot and rose, I felt a profound sense of peace. The house was quiet, as it had been that Christmas, but the silence was different now. It wasn't the silence of abandonment, it was the silence of acceptance, the silence of a story reaching its natural, considered conclusion. I had lived. I had loved. I had been disappointed. And I had, in the end, found a way to make my mark. Not in the way I had once envisioned, through the lineage of family, but in a way that felt truer, more authentically mine. The roots of a tree spread wide, seeking nourishment. Some grow deep, anchoring it firmly. Others wither, failing to find purchase. My family tree had its withered branches. But the tree itself, my life, had found other ways to draw sustenance. other ways to ensure its essence would endure. And as the darkness gathered outside, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. I often wonder about the day Mr. Henderson read my will. I won't be there, of course, but I can picture it. Can't you? The sterile, quiet atmosphere of a lawyer's office. The air, thick with expectation. Perhaps a feigned solemnity. Sarah would be there, dressed impeccably. Her composure probably a little too rigid. Mark, likely impatient, checking his watch, already calculating how this interruption would affect his schedule, his portfolio. Perhaps their spouses, maybe even my older grandchildren, if they felt an obligation or a morbid curiosity. They would be anticipating. That's the word. Anticipating the final tally. The distribution of assets carefully accumulated over a lifetime. My lifetime. Arthur's lifetime. I imagine Mr. Henderson, his face impassive, adjusting his spectacles, the rustle of paper, the loudest sound in the room. He'd read through the legal preamble, the formal declarations, and then he would come to it. The section detailing the beneficiaries. I can almost hear the sharp intake of breath. Or perhaps just a stunned, uncomprehending silence. A silence far louder than the one I endured that Christmas. To the Willow Creek Animal Shelter. To the Eleanor Albright Scholarship Fund for Women. To the Serene Valley Hospice. Names they wouldn't recognize. Causes they had never spared a thought for. And then the final, unequivocal clause. As for my children, Sarah Albright, Jones and Mark Albright, I leave them my love, and the hope that they find in their own lives the fulfillment they so diligently pursued. Love. Yes, I did love them. Or at least, I loved the memory of the children they once were, the potential they once held. But love, I had learned, was not a blank check. It was not an endless well from which one could draw without ever replenishing. I wonder, did Sarah's perfectly composed face crack then? Did Mark's impatience turn to incredulous anger? Did they look at each other, searching for an explanation, a mistake? There must be some mistake, one of them might exclaim, the voice tight with disbelief, rapidly morphing into outrage. Mr. Henderson, bless his professional calm, would simply affirm the document's validity. My signature, clear and steady, witnessed, legally binding, the finality of it, the absolute, unchangeable truth of my decision. They would have expected something, a token, perhaps, if they'd sensed my displeasure. But everything? My entire estate, gifted away to strangers, to animals, to causes they deemed irrelevant? The betrayal they would feel. Oh, the irony. The exquisite, painful irony. They, who had mastered the art of the casual betrayal, the slow abandonment, now faced with what they would undoubtedly perceive as the ultimate act of maternal treachery. But it wasn't treachery. It was clarity. It was the consequence of their own choices, reflected back at them in the stark, unyielding language of a legal document. I hope, in that moment, they felt something of the emptiness I felt that Christmas. The sudden, cold realization of being left out, of being deemed not worthy, not of money, no, but of consideration, of a place at the heart of things. Perhaps then, for a fleeting second, they might understand. Or perhaps not. Perhaps they would only see the money, the lost inheritance, the numbers that didn't add up in their favor. That, I suspect, is the more likely scenario. And in a way, that, too, is part of the poetic justice of it all. Their grief would be for the material, for the tangible. Mine had been for the intangible, for the lost connections, the love unreturned, and I know which loss is the greater. The true beauty of it, the part that brings a quiet smile to my soul, is knowing where that money, that lifetime of careful saving and quiet living, will now go. It won't be frittered away on another fleeting holiday they'd forget to invite me to, or absorbed into a stock portfolio they'd discuss in hushed, important tones while I sat in the corner. No, it will work. It will build. It will comfort. I imagine the Willow Creek Animal Shelter. Their kennels a little warmer this winter. Perhaps a new wing built, allowing them to save more frightened, abandoned creatures. I see old dogs, like my Buster, getting the gentle care they need in their final years, not ending their days on a cold concrete floor. I see volunteers, like Chloe, having the resources to do even more good, their compassion amplified by my legacy. That's a kind of warmth that no radiator could ever provide. Then there's the Eleanor Albright Scholarship Fund. Young women, bright and ambitious, but perhaps lacking the means, getting a chance. A chance to learn, to grow, to build their own futures. Futures not dictated by circumstance, but by their own talent and hard work. I picture them in classrooms, in libraries, heads bent over books, eyes shining with the thrill of discovery. Perhaps one of them will become a doctor, a scientist, an artist, a teacher like my own mother. My small contribution, a ripple spreading outwards, creating opportunities I could only dream of for them. That's a kind of immortality, isn't it? A different kind of lineage. And the Serene Valley Hospice. Oh, the gentle hands there, the quiet understanding. My gift will mean more comfortable beds, perhaps, or more staff to offer solace, to ease the pain of those at the very end of their journeys. It will mean dignity and peace for people who, like my friend Eleanor, deserve to leave this world without fear, without distress. It's a quiet kind of heroism they practice there, day in and day out. To support that, even in a small way, feels like the most profound act of love I could offer. This is where my roots will truly flourish now, not in the barren ground of my children's indifference, but in the fertile soil of kindness, compassion, and hope. They might see it as a loss, my family, a fortune squandered on sentimental causes, but they would be wrong. It's an investment in the things that truly matter, the things that endure beyond share prices and property values, the things that weave the true fabric of a good life, a meaningful existence. The poetic justice isn't in their shock or anger. It's in the quiet, constructive good that will bloom from their neglect. They left me alone, and in that aloneness, I found a way to embrace so many more. Their silence created the space for my actions to finally speak louder than any words of disappointment I might have uttered. And that speech, I trust, will be eloquent and enduring. What is family, really? Is it merely a matter of shared DNA, a biological accident that binds us together whether we like it or not? For years, I believed that. I clung to that definition, even as the evidence mounted that the ties of blood had worn thin, frayed by distance and disinterest. I thought that being a mother, a grandmother, automatically conferred a certain sacredness, a bond that could withstand anything. I was wrong. Or perhaps not entirely wrong, but my understanding was incomplete. Family, I've come to believe, is not a noun as much as it is a verb. It's an action. It's about showing up. It's about caring, tending, nurturing. It's about making space in your life for another, not just in the big moments, but in the small, everyday ones. It's a garden that requires constant weeding and watering from all its members, not just one aging gardener struggling alone. My children, Sarah and Mark, they were my family by birth. But did they act as family? In the end, the answer was a resounding, deafening no. They became connections of convenience. People who remembered me when duty called, or when guilt, perhaps, pricked them momentarily. But not true family. Not in the way that warms the soul, that provides an anchor in the storms of life. The irony is that in letting go of the family I thought I had, or should have had, I found a different kind of family, a different kind of connection. In the wagging tails at the shelter, in the earnest gratitude of the hospice director, in the imagined futures of the young women who will benefit from my scholarship, there, I found a sense of belonging, of purpose, that had long been missing. It's a bittersweet realization, this. There's a melancholy to it, a quiet grief for what might have been, for the close-knit, loving family I once dreamed of, presiding over in my old age. That dream died a slow death, culminating in that silent Christmas. But grief, I've learned, can also be a cleansing fire. It burns away the illusions, leaving behind the stark, unvarnished truth. And the truth is, they lost more than I did. They lost the unwavering, unconditional love I had offered them for so many years. They lost the richness of shared history, the comfort of genuine connection, things they were too busy, too self-absorbed to value. They closed a door on me, incrementally, year by year, until it was finally, firmly shut. And in doing so, they never realized that on the other side of that door, I might just find a new path, a wider vista. My legacy now belongs to those who will cherish it, who will use it to cultivate kindness and hope. And that, in the final accounting, feels like a profound victory, not over them, but over loneliness, over neglect, over the slow erasure they had tried to impose. I redefined family for myself, and in that redefinition, I found my peace. So, what is the lesson in all of this? If there is one, perhaps it's simply this: your life is your own story to write, right up until the very last page. No one else holds the pen, unless you allow them to. For too long, I allowed the narrative of my life to be dictated by the expectations and, ultimately, the indifference of others. I waited for them to value me, to see me, to make space for me. And in waiting, I diminished myself, became a supporting character in my own drama. That Christmas, the silence they gifted me was, in an unintended way, the greatest gift of all. It forced me to listen to my own voice, a voice I had quieted for too long. It forced me to see my own worth, independent of their validation. Do you ever feel that? That sense of being overlooked, taken for granted by the very people who should hold you closest. It's a painful place to be, but it doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the beginning of a new chapter, one where you are the protagonist, making choices that honor your own heart, your own values. Don't wait for others to give you permission to live fully, to decide your own legacy. The anger I felt, that righteous anger, it wasn't a destructive force, it was fuel. It propelled me to action, to reclaim what was mine, my dignity, my resources, my final say. There's a quiet triumph in that, a deep, satisfying peace that has nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with self-respect. My family, I'm sure, will call me bitter, resentful. They will say I acted out of spite. Let them. Their understanding was always limited, filtered through the lens of their own self-interest. What they will never comprehend is the profound liberation that came from that decision. The joy of knowing that my life's work, my love, would be channeled into something meaningful, something that would create ripples of good in the world. They thought they left me alone with nothing that Christmas. But in that quiet house, surrounded by the ghosts of what I thought my family was, I found everything I truly needed: myself, my strength, and the clarity to make my ending, my legacy, entirely my own. And perhaps, just perhaps, my story might encourage someone else to pick up their own pen, to write their own ending, with courage and with grace. That would be a legacy worth leaving indeed.